to this webinar. The webinar on pathways for the return to learning, specifically looking at the Accelerated Education Working Group catch-up principles. And we're going to hear about catch-up programs from colleagues in Liberia and in Cameroon. So I just first off like to introduce you to the panel members. My name is Martha Hewison. I'm an education advisor for the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and I also chair the Accelerated Education Working Group. And I have a specific focus in UNHCR on out-of-school children and youth. And we also have with us today Ruth Muto. Ruth is an education and emergency specialist at Plan International in Cameroon. She oversees the education projects in the far north of Cameroon and ensures technical support for accelerated education programs. Next up, we have Kayla. Kayla is an independent consultant who conducts research and evaluations and provides technical assistance in education and emergencies contexts. She's also a consultant to the Accelerated Education Working Group and led the development of the 10 principles for catch-up programs that we'll be looking at today and other COVID-19 guidance. And then last but not least, we have another colleague, Abba Kanga. Abba is a program manager for the Luminous Fund in Liberia, where he oversees the Luminous Second Chance program, coordinating with Ministry of Education and implementing partners. And Abba's worked in education in Liberia for over 12 years with organizations such as World Education, the International Organization for Migration, and USAID, among others. Next slide, please. If you can pull up the next slide, please, Andrew, just a little bit of housekeeping. I think, well, I'll tell you about the housekeeping whilst we're looking for the slide. So just a few notes. Just a few notes for participants. So due to the high number of participants in the webinar, all of the microphones and cameras are muted, and only the presenters can speak and show their video. And then also the participants, you can write questions in the Q&A, or you can contact the organizers via the chat. We have closed captioning available. If you don't automatically see the English captions at the bottom of your Zoom window, click the closed caption button and turn on or turn off. You can also post questions in the Q&A at any time, and as much as possible, we'll try and answer them. And we'll respond in writing or verbally. And at the end also, we have allocated a good 20 minutes for questions and answers. Great, I can see the housekeeping slide now. And there will be a recording of the webinar and all related presentations. So all the material in this webinar will all be shared with all of you at the end by email and also posted on the INEE site. So with further ado, we'll go into the next slide, please, Andrew. Great, that was much easier. So I wanted just to start off by talking about the Accelerated Education Working Group. I wanted just to talk about who we are and what we do. So the Accelerated Education Working Group, or the AEWG, is an interagency working group made up of members supporting or funding accelerated education programs. And the AEWG aims to improve the quality of accelerated education programs through developing guidance and tools to ensure accelerated education is a relevant response and to support a more harmonized approach to accelerated education programs globally. What we do, to date, we've put significant investment and efforts by the AEWG, and we have what we call a conceptual framework for what constitutes good practice in accelerated education. I know some of you will be familiar with the development of the 10 principles for effective practice and the accompanying guide to the principles. And really, these set a foundation for all of our tools and guidance. And we think that all of our tools and guidance are really key to improving program quality, design, implementation, and assessment of results. And then to address the growing need for accelerated education programs, in 2021, the Accelerated Education Working Group is engaging more directly with national policymakers and key donors who are shaping or have the potential to shape the structural conditions within which AEPs operate. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to have a look at the 4 areas of focus for the AEWG for 2021. You can see our overall goal at the top there, which is improving accelerated education program quality. And then we have these 4 areas plus a 5th area responding to COVID. But just looking a little bit at each area and what we do in each area, we have the first area about accelerated education programs being included by more governments in education plans and policies. And really what the AEWG envisions is that more governments recognize accelerated education as a cost-effective, inclusive and equitable response for overage out-of-school children and youth. So we will continue to facilitate national workshops and work closely with governments, not only to increase the quality of accelerated education, but also to try and have them included in national education plans and policies. The second area is really strengthening our evidence base, and this is something that we've been working a lot on. We released in 2020 an evidence review of accelerated education, and in 2021 we are starting a big research project which is called Mapping the Policy Terrain for Educating the Hardest to Reach in EIE Contexts. And this research is going to identify key factors affecting implementation of accelerated education programs at the national, regional and local levels. So we're really excited to start this 4-year research project. And then also we'll continue to support and nurture existing and new research partnerships and present the evidence for accelerated education at key fora. We recently, just last week, presented at CIES. Our third area of focus, improving the quality of accelerated education. So we'll continue to focus on ensuring the effective dissemination and utilization of all of our tools and guidance amongst donors, national governments, key stakeholders and implementing partners. And then our 4th area on the left here, that really trying to work to make sure that accelerated education programs are better resourced by all key stakeholders for scale and quality. And in 2021, we are targeting some key stakeholders to really promote and advocate of the inclusion of accelerated education within donor approaches and programmatic responses. And also to try and really recognize that accelerated education is an important strategy for connecting humanitarian early recovery and development programming. And then our last area, our fifth additional area, is responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in 2020, in response to the pandemic, the Accelerated Education Working Group developed several technical notes to support ministries and key stakeholders in deploying effective responses to the needs of learners who've missed out on education. We've developed several tools and we'll put them into the chat for you. The COVID-19 pathways for the return to learning, COVID-19 guidance on condensing a curriculum, and then the principles for catch-up programs, which we're going to look at today. So just before I hand over to Kayla, who led the development of the catch-up principles and who's going to present on them today, I would just like to just say a quick note about why catch-up when we are focusing on accelerated education, because we're the Accelerated Education Working Group. And one of the reasons that we looked at developing tools and guidance for catch-up programs was during the COVID pandemic, the AEWG was approached very many times, as many stakeholders were really requesting support to develop accelerated education programs using all our tools and guidance as a response to learners who'd missed out on education due to COVID. And when we look at the AEWG program definitions, because the AEWG has very specific definitions for accelerated education, for catch-up, remedial, and bridging courses, we can see that for the AEWG, that accelerated education programs are specifically for over age, out of school learners. So for learners who've really been out of school for so long that they've become overage or who have never entered the education system. Whereas the majority of learners who had missed out on education due to COVID had already been enrolled in an education program, either formal or non-formal, and they didn't require a whole accelerated education program, but rather what they needed was a short-term intervention just to really catch up and get back on track. And then when we highlighted this to stakeholders and we said, maybe we shouldn't be looking at accelerated education programs, we should be looking at developing catch-up programs, then they asked, do you have any guidance on this? And we said, no. So that's why we spent a lot of last year developing this pathways for the return to learning, this support in how to condense a curriculum. And then today, we're really officially launching our catch-up principles. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Kayla, who's going to describe these tools. Thanks so much, Kayla.
Great, thanks, Martha. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks for the introduction for how we came to developing the catch-up principles. Brief recap, just as Martha has said, one of the major challenges we noted was the conflation of the terms catch-up programming and accelerated education. So the three tools that I'm going to preview today are really intended to help folks really understand the nuanced differences between accelerated education and catch-up programming, to be able to reflect, especially at the present time during COVID-19, as we're all beginning to reopen schools, identify which are the programs that are most appropriate for learners, both those who were previously out of school and might need an AEP, and those who were in school and are probably going to need a catch-up program. And then to understand what we believe to be best practice in developing catch-up programs. And as an accelerated education working group, the 11 members of the AEWG have extensive experience not only in accelerated education, but also in catch-up programming and other types of non-formal education. So we were able to draw upon that expertise. So the three tools, which I'm going to preview, which were all developed under this work plan outcome area of the COVID-19 education response, are first a COVID-19 decision tree and an accompanying brief, principles, 10 principles for catch-up programs, and finally guidance on condensing a curriculum during COVID-19. So the first of these tools was the COVID-19 decision tree and accompanying brief. The brief discusses the relevance of catch-up programs and accelerated education programs in the COVID-19 response, with a focus on equity and ensuring that all learners get back into education. And the decision tree is a tool to help ministries of education, donors, implementers, and other education stakeholders to identify what types of education programs will help which learners in which situations, as well as to consider some of the primary issues in implementing each of these programs. So as you see here, the decision tree first asks users to think about the type of education program that learners were attending prior to the education disruption, whether that be COVID-19 or another disruption. And those might include education programs such as formal schooling, or an alternative education program like alternative basic ed or accelerated education, or it might be another type of non-formal education program or technical or skills-based training. And then another subset of learners might have been out of school prior to that disruption. And here we include those learners who were attending non-accredited, non-certified education programs. So then the decision tree asks users to think about, for those learners who were already attending a formal or alternative education program, will they be able to return to that same program after the education disruption? And if so, how much instructional time did they miss while schools were closed or while they were out of school? And we recognize that this can vary immensely, even within the same context. So for some learners, for example, they might have had access to high quality distance learning, and as a result did not miss a lot of instructional time, were largely able to keep up. However, there might be other learners in the exact same context that did not have this access to distance learning or could not benefit from that in the same way. So these things, along with, simply how long schools were closed, will affect how much learners have missed. So then we suggest that for those learners who were attending formal or alternative education, are they able to return to that same program? And if they are, and they're only if they only missed a little bit of education, for example, 3 months of schooling, they can probably get by with extending instructional time in that program. For example, by lengthening the school day or term, by shortening breaks or holidays, or by introducing double shifting. For those who can return but missed approximately 3 to 12 months, we suggest that they will probably need a catch-up program that includes a condensed curriculum, which we'll discuss in just a little bit. And for those learners who are struggling in the catch-up program, they might also need remedial supports in the content areas in which they have difficulty. We also note that for learners in formal education who cannot return, but might be able to join a non-formal program, they might benefit from introducing a non-formal catch-up program. And for learners already in accelerated education programs, we, as the Accelerated Education Working Group, believe that it'll be very challenging to further condense the curriculum. So we strongly recommend extending instructional time and exploring other options, such as hybrid learning and other self-directed approaches, although we do recognize that there are some accelerated education programs that do further condense an accelerated program, including a program implemented by Luminos. We're going to hear a little bit more from Luminos later. And finally, for those learners who cannot return or who were out of school prior to the pandemic, we suggest that you consult the AEWG's original decision tree, which helps users to consider and address the barriers to accessing education. Next, we as the AEWG felt it was really important to further explore and explain why we felt that for the vast majority of learners who experienced an education disruption due to COVID-19, that a catch-up program rather than an accelerated education program would likely be the best response. And in the Principles for Catch-up Programs, we developed a table which looks at the learners, objectives, and coverage of the various types of education programs which can be used to support out-of-school learners or learners who are returning to school after a disruption. To contrast, we can see here that accelerated education programs are for overage out-of-school children and youth, whereas catch-up programs are for learners who were already attending an education program prior to a disruption in their education. Accelerated education programs are for learners who have been out of school and who are overage by 2 or more years. So they've been out of school for a much more substantial chunk of time. Whereas catch-up programs are for those who missed approximately 3 to 12 months. AEPs also aim to help learners complete the full primary curriculum in many cases, or something very similar to that. The idea is that it's a standalone program that helps them to complete the curriculum, get certification, or at least get very close to that and be set up for that. Whereas in contrast, a catch-up program helps learners to recover the knowledge and skills that they lost and gain those that they missed during the disruption in order to get back on track. And finally, accelerated education programs help learners transition into the next education level after they've obtained that certification. And catch-up programs are really more to help learners to remain in the same education program and simply return back to the spot in the curriculum that they should have been at if the disruption had not occurred. In the Catch-up Principles document, we provide guidance for education practitioners who are designing or implementing catch-up programs. And these principles, like the AE principles, are a set of 10 principles organized into 4 focus areas. And these focus areas align also with the AE principles. So you'll see a lot of similarity. However, in the catch-up principles, we didn't want to simply repeat best practices in education or even in the acceleration of the acquisition of skills. Really, we wanted to highlight and specify what was different specifically about catch-up programs. And we did this because, we recognize first that catch-up programs are often implemented in an already existing education program, but also because there's so much guidance already out there on safe, inclusive, quality education in general. So we really wanted to highlight what was specific about catch-up programs, or what was especially important because of the nature of the emergency that disrupted learners' education. In principles 1 through 5, which are focused on learners, we highlight who the catch-up learners are. So in other words, children and adolescents who are out of school for approximately 3 to 12 months due to an education disruption and who need to catch up and get back on track. We also kept in mind the safety and security issues and how that affects learners and teachers' well-being, as well as the teaching and learning processes that have been affected by the emergencies. We provided guidance on condensing a curriculum and utilizing learner-centered pedagogy, and we explored the adaptation of instructional time and delivery modality. And these things have really been built out further from the accelerated education principles, especially with adaptation of instructional time and delivery modality, thinking of the importance during COVID-19 and catch-up programs. And we really wanted to highlight that. In principles 6 and 7, we focus on teachers, and we emphasize the need to re-engage teachers in some contexts who might be hesitant or unable to return to teaching. And we gave an explicit focus on teachers' well-being, since those teachers likely will have faced the same emergency as the learners. In principle 8, we focus on program management, and we emphasize the need for community involvement in order to support all learners to catch up. And especially during the COVID-19 crisis, when learners may return, but schools might close again, and so they might be out again, and it might ping pong back and forth for a little while. And we're already seeing that in many contexts. And finally, in principles 9 and 10, we focus on alignment with the Ministry of Education and other policy frameworks. And we really stress that in order for learners to catch up, and in some cases transition back into formal education, catch-up programs need to be aligned with the national education systems. So the catch-up principles, as I started to mention, they take an explicit equity and inclusion position, and we tried to ensure that they are well-being and trauma informed and focused. And we also tried to promote a resilience building mindset within the principles. So we're trying to convey that emergencies can also be an opportunity to transform and strengthen education systems, making them better able to meet the needs of all learners. And the third tool that we developed was when we recognized the need to really elaborate on principle 3, which is around developing a condensed curriculum for catch-up programs. So we developed a set of a bit of guidance around how exactly we can condense a curriculum during COVID-19. And then we're elaborating on that, building on that to develop condensing curriculum guidance for full accelerated education programs. But this first tool here is really focusing on catch-up programs, especially during COVID-19. So we recognize in this guidance that we as education practitioners want to do everything that we can to ensure that when learners return, that they stay in school, that they don't fall farther behind, and that they're able to get to catch up and get back on track. And so we note that simply restarting the school year that was missed due to COVID-19 or another education disruption is not a successful approach, and it only makes learners fall farther behind. And neither is simply promoting them and jumping nearly a whole year ahead, skipping all of the content they missed when they were out of school. So instead, we need to focus on condensing the curriculum by prioritizing what essential skills learners need and integrating and building on those throughout, and provide the required scaffolding, differentiation, and remedial support to ensure that all learners are able to succeed at the current grade level and transition successfully to the next. The guidance on condensing a curriculum during COVID-19 aims to be practical and flexible. It aims to support specifically primary school education stakeholders, but there might be some tips that could be used for secondary. But as the Accelerated Education Working Group, we've focused till now on primary schools. And so at present, the condensing curriculum guidance is focused on primary schools. And we also recognized that a condensed curriculum forms part of an overall instructional response to COVID-19 and is by no means a silver bullet and is by no means the only intervention that's needed. The guidance can be used by ministries of education at the national and subnational level, by curriculum developers, or by implementing partners. And we do note that it's not specifically designed for use by teachers. It can be adapted as necessary for different contexts, whether that be humanitarian or development settings. And the guidance can help users prioritize competencies and condense the curriculum, not only for in-person learning, but also for distance or hybrid approaches. According to the guidance, a condensed curriculum is a prioritized curriculum. It identifies the essential knowledge and skills that learners must have to be able to succeed at the present grade and transition to the next grade level. It emphasizes transferable knowledge and skills. In other words, those competencies which learners can bring from one grade to the next or from one subject to another subject. And because of this, a condensed curriculum will frequently focus on numeracy and literacy, as well as problem solving and thinking skills. And finally, a condensed curriculum also has a focus on social emotional learning, recognizing that children will have been out of school for considerable periods of time, and they might have, or very likely have, experienced negative impacts on their well-being. Also included in the guidance are basic design principles, which can help users focus their process for condensing the curriculum by ensuring that the curriculum is inclusive of all learners, that it's outcome or competency based, that it's coherent, comprehensible, and relevant, and that it supports the holistic well-being of all learners. The guidance also provides planning tips for condensing the curriculum to orient users to the step-by-step process that we're recommending that they can follow. And finally, it provides a checklist for getting started, and that helps users to consider in their preparations the necessary resources, the financial resources, the human resources, any background training, or any additional supports that will be needed in order to successfully complete the process of condensing the curriculum. So with all of that said, I look forward to any questions that you might have that you can drop in the question and answer box or in the chat. And for further information, you can find all of the AEWG tools, including these COVID-19 tools and guidance on the INEE website. So thank you very much. And I will now pass it back to my colleague, Ruth, from Plan International in Cameroon.
Thank you so much, Kayla. Hello, everyone, and greetings from the Far North region of Cameroon. I would like to start by giving a brief overview of the education context of the Far North region of Cameroon. So the Far North region is one of the poorest of Cameroon with the lowest education rate, and is classified by the government of Cameroon as a priority education zone. So due to the ongoing crisis, classrooms have been destroyed and the remaining functioning formal schools are very overcrowded. For example, there are currently 281 schools with only one government teacher per school, with an average of one teacher to 162 children. As a fact, the instability in the region continues to increase the already limited access to basic social services, particularly with regard to the education system, have led to a significant number of children and young being out of school for several years. We could see here that there is a need to provide an appropriate education package to meet the specific needs of those children, and this is where the catch-up program CARED is important in Cameroon. So the program was developed in 2011 by the Educational Research Network for West and Central Africa in collaboration with the Minister of Education and UNICEF. And one of its main objectives is to facilitate the reintegration of out-of-school children to the educational systems. So in 2016, the curriculum was reviewed and adapted by UNICEF in collaboration with Plan International and the Minister of Education to support the reintegration of Central African Republic of out-of-school refugee children who arrived in Cameroon. In 2017, further review was conducted by Plan International and the Minister of Education in order to use the curriculum in the Far North region with high numbers of out-of-school IDPs and refugee children as a result of the Black Child crisis. So since 2020, Plan International, in partnership with NRC, through the Education in Emergency Response for out-of-school children affected by displacement in the Far North region, implemented different activities to support the government actions to improve access to quality education that include, of course, the catch-up program CARED and of school, the accelerated education. ECHO is found in this partnership. Next, please. So the catch-up program, as we already know, is a short-term transitional education program that has been accredited by the Ministry of Basic Education in Cameroon. And we also promote the use of the catch-up principle, and here we will align this with principle 9 and 10. Learners are children aged between 6 and 13 whose education has been interrupted for less than 2 years for different reasons like poverty, displacement, or cultural barriers, just to name a few. This is again is in line with catch-up principle 1 and 5. In terms of educator, we are working with qualified teachers trained by the Minister of Education, teachers training including child self-grading, safe school declaration, and prevention against COVID-19, but of course also social emotional learning for kids. We could refer this to the catch-up principle 6 and 7. And in fact, it is really important that teachers receive the necessary training as they will be working with children from different academic levels who are placed in 2 main cohorts, primary and secondary. It is convenient for the classes to be held during the summer break, July and August, before the start of the academic year. Next, please. Next slide. Thank you. And the pre-existing school facilities serve as the most convenient environment to conduct the session. So this explains why it is really important for CARED, for the catch-up program, to work in total partnership with the Cameroonian government and the educational institution to ensure the smooth functioning of such program. So learners who successfully transition into formal education receive student kits to start the school year. But the work doesn't end there. When the children are reintegrated to the educational system, we really follow up them. There is a follow-up to identify those children who will need additional learning support, and they will continue to be supported via remedial courses during the Christmas break. The communities play a big role in terms of supporting the identification, enrollment, and children attendance. We use communities relay to support both children in school and in community by doing home visits. We also engage local authorities and communities leaders to influence breaking culture and traditional barriers. And the other thing is that we enhance the capacity of formal school The project has provided assistance with educational equipment. We strengthen the capacity of school governance bodies such as school management committees, parent teachers association, or mother association. And we really laid more emphasis with fostering the collaboration with mother association to support the increase or in school enrollment for girls. Next, please. So in terms of coordination, the activities are coordinated by the Minister of Basic Education and of course NSA, who's our education partner. The minister is responsible of the technical aspects related to the identification of school communities, the training of teachers, the process of reintegration of learners into formal schools. As for our partner NRC and Plan International, we are in charge of providing material and financial means for the smooth running of the activities, and also in charge of monitoring to ensure that the program is carried out with respect of children's rights and the catch-up program principle. So now I would like to reflect on some of the challenges that we have faced in this project. Please, next. As I say at the beginning, the classrooms are already overcrowded, so this makes very, very challenging the transition of learners back into the formal system. And we believe that there is a huge need to make funding school a priority in the Far North region. We also realize that the lack of birth registration makes it difficult for students in exams class. Of course, the COVID-19 has affected children and families in regard of livelihood activity and nutrition. The next challenge I would love to talk about is the language of instruction. The Catch-up program in Cameroon is designed for the French-speaking educational system. So there is increasing need for English-speaking teachers in the region to support the educational integration and meet the need of English-speaking children. We have the case of children who were schooling in Nigeria and who find themselves moving to the Far North region, who is the French-speaking region. So this is really a big challenge right now. Next, please. As a lesson learned, we love to say that engaging with the communities is a key to a successful program implementation, especially with some communities that have cultural barriers to education. And it's really important to develop great relationship with the religious leader and example, the Quranic teachers. I could give you a really great example when we realized that we met one of the Quranic teachers who came to us with a group of out-of-school children, and of course, encouraged them to take part in the program. So this was a result of all the awareness campaign that was done before, and the great relationship that the communities have with us. The second lesson learned is about teachers. It was quite challenging to find female instructors to fill the empty vacuum, mainly due to the insecurity in the region. So women are not really interested to perform in those areas. So I will stop here, and I would have to say thank you for listening, and I will be more than happy to respond to any question later on. Thank you so much, and I will now pass over to Abba. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Ruth. And I'm pleased to be here to speak about Lumina's work helping our students in Liberia catch up following school closures due to COVID-19. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. Allow me to first acquaint you with Lumina's and what we do and who we are. The Lumina's Fund is a Boston-based organization Our work focuses on ensuring that the most marginalized children, those denied an education for one reason or another, learn the foundations of literacy and numeracy through what we like to call joyful learning. To do this, we run a program called the Second Chance Program. Now, Second Chance is a 10-month accelerated learning education program, or AEP. Our target learners are children between the ages of 8 to 12. Learners are either overage and have never been to school before, or have entered school and dropped out before developing basic learning competency. Second Chance classes have maximum 30 learners and are run by young persons from the community who we identify, select, train, and provide ongoing support to. Our pedagogy is activity-based and child-centered. We use a condensed phonic-based curriculum, which covers grade 1 to 3 within 10 months. We have an 8 hours long day, an 8 hours long school day, 5 hours of which is devoted to literacy. In addition to supporting students to develop fundamental literacy and numeric skills, a major focus area for us is ensuring that our students learn how to learn, wherein they are able to drive their own learning beyond the 10 months that they spend with us in the Second Chance classes. At the end of 10 months, learners are supported to transition into local government schools where they continue their education, generally at the grade 3 or 4 levels. Next slide, please. So the Luminous Second Chance in a nutshell. So that's the Luminous Second Chance program in a nutshell. Let's now move to our catch-up programming in Liberia during the COVID-19. Next slide, please. So who are Luminous catch-up learners?
Oh, I think Abba is frozen. Maybe the internet is a problem for him. Let's just give him 1 second and see if he comes back. Yeah, maybe Abba, you can stop your video to see if it helps improve with the bandwidth. Let's cross our fingers that Abba can come back. Yeah, maybe while we wait for we wait for Abba to come back, I think I can just present this slide for him. So the Luminous Catch-up learners, for example, there's the example of Wata, who's a 10-year-old girl from Montserrado County. And before attending the Second Chance program, she was out of school working in the market for her parents. And I think during COVID-19, someone is saying, Abba, please come back. I'm obviously not as good as Abba as presenting this. Let me just ask, Sarah, if you can try and make Caitlin co-host. I think she can present this slide better than myself. But I'll carry on, I'll try. So that during COVID-19, caregivers were unable to assist Wata and girls like Wata with home-based learning, and this home-based learning was provided by Luminous. There was such things like no hand washing stations available in the community, and radio lessons were provided by the Ministry of Education. But really, so many children, I think, were really very anxious about COVID-19. Let me just see if Abba is back or if Caitlin can take over. Just apologies.
Yes, I am back. Sorry.
Oh, thank goodness, Abba, because I'm not doing a very good job. So I'm passing back to you. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Martha. For some reason, my video was not coming on, but I think I can still continue on from there. So this slide is talking about who are our Luminous catch-up learners. Meet Wata, 10 years old from Montserrado County. Before Second Chance, Wata was an out-of-school child. She spent her time working in the market for her parents, like most of all the out-of-school children in Liberia. Prior to COVID-19, Wata was attending the Second Chance program from March onward to last year when school closed in Liberia. Wata was at home. She missed 3 months of her 10 months accelerated education program. She had been reading materials and assignments from Luminous to complete at home, but no parent support on those assignments. Having lived through Ebola, Wata remembers Ebola and is scared by COVID-19. She's eager for school to reopen so that she can return to Second Chance. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what did the school year look like for Wata and her peers? As we know, it was a different academic year. So in a normal school year, Second Chance is a 10 months accelerated education program, and we run from September to June. Students take a placement exam in June, which determine their appropriate grades for transition into government schools, and then are supported by Luminous to transition into government schools in September for the start of the new academic year. Last year, of course, due to COVID, the year didn't look like a normal year. Luminous students attended Second Chance from September to mid-March, at which point the government mandated closure of schools in Liberia. Schools were closed from March to November, officially reopening December 1st. Luminous catch-up program or microclasses were run from September to November. Students took placement exam at the end of November and transitioned into government schools for the start of the new school year in January. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So generally, very briefly, what led us to the decision to run catch-up programming or microclasses for our students? If we turn to the COVID-19 decision tree, our learners were attending a certified alternative education program before COVID-19. They missed 3 months or 1/3 of the accelerated program due to school closure. They will return to the same accelerated education program, Second Chance, and take part in catch-up programming. A couple of key considerations for Luminous as we were navigating this. We wanted to make sure that students could catch up as much as possible and transition as planned for the next academic year. And two, an important question, though not one that we might have time to discuss, but how do you further accelerate learning for learners in an AEP impacted by school closures? Next slide, please. Thank you. In the final few minutes, we'll take a deeper dive into Luminous microclasses and look at how microclasses align with the AEWG COVID-19 catch-up principles. Before launching into microclasses, we worked closely with the MOE to gain approval for running microclasses. This came in late August. Microclasses launched in early September. To ensure we were meeting the holistic needs of learners, starting last July, Luminous worked with the MOE to design and conduct a need assessment, looking at barriers that learners may face in the returning to school. Prior to the start of microclasses, remote training was deployed to facilitators on a microclasses format and curriculum. Facilitators received all materials they needed to run microclasses, including curriculum, copybooks, readers, pencils, and of course, wash materials, masks, hand sanitizers, etc. Microclasses were 1 hour, 45-minute classes run Monday through Saturdays, led by a Second Chance facilitator. Saturday classes were in addition to our original program, which ran up to Friday. 4 shifts of classes were run per day. Class size were reduced to 7 to 8 students as compared to 30 students in a normal Second Chance class. Luminous microclasses curriculum was a condensed curriculum that covered concepts students missed during the school closure and revised key concepts taught earlier in the year, focused on literacy and numeracy. Student learning levels were assessed on the first day of microclasses through a numeracy diagnostic test and a 3-minute rapid reading test, which tells us the number of words per minute that learners are reading. At the end of the microclasses, students took the Luminous placement exam. However, this was an amended version of our normal placement exam, which covered just the content that students covered last year, accounting for some missed learning during the school closure and what we weren't able to compensate for during microclasses. Normally, there's an add and drop period of 2 to 3 weeks at the start of the year the start of the school year where students can join the program. However, during micro classes, we allow students to join at any point. Thank you so much. I think I will pause there, and we look forward to any questions that we may have. Let me turn this back over to Martha. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you to Kayla and Abba and Ruth for all of those great presentations, and especially to see what catch-up looks like in Cameroon and Liberia. So now what I'd like to do, I think we have about 10 minutes or so for questions. We have had several questions in the chat, so I'm just going to pull them up. I have a couple of questions for you, Abba, so I'll start with you. There's a question about, could you please be more explicit on the meaning of child-centered learning and its interconnectivity in a catch-up education framework? So if you can have a go at answering that, Abba, thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a good question. We take advantage of activity-based learning, which puts the child like in the center of the learning, and the facilitator is more passive and fostering the learning. So it's no longer the facilitator being the star of the show where he stands in front of the class and is able and kind of demonstrates a lesson, but it's more now child-centered, where the students kind of take control of their own learning, fostered by the guidance of the facilitator.
Great, thank you. And I have a question specifically for you, Ruth. In the case of Cameroon, how were out-of-school children attended? Or I'm not sure if that's how were out-of-school children identified. And according to the presentation, the program was just focused for boys and girls who enrolled in the education system.
Hi, Martha. So yeah, couldn't hear the first part of the question, please.
Sorry, in the case of Cameroon, how were out-of-school children identified? And the second part was, according to the presentation, the program was just focused for boys and girls who enrolled in the education system.
So the first question, I would like to say that again, we really put an emphasis to work with the community. So we use the relay communities to really go into family and see where are the kids who really need to be on that program. So we work with the parents, we work with the communities, and that's where we do the risk assessment also, and that's where we start from. And of course, the focus here is to make sure that the kids and the students are reintegrated into the formal system. The catch-up program is just for 2 months on the summer break, and is giving the chance to the student to start on the next September to go back to the formal systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And a question for you, Kayla. To what extent are the 10 principles including some considerations regarding prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse?
Great, thanks for the question, Martha. This is a really important one, and we just want to recognize that we know that during COVID-19 and also other education disruptions, we saw this in Ebola as well, that many children and adolescents have experienced increased rates of abuse, including sexual abuse and exploitation, and of neglect and other traumas. So we really wanted to focus in the principles on, first, the need for psychosocial support and social emotional learning within catch-up programs, and also looking at teacher well-being and relationship building as learners return. We also highlight the importance in the principles of safety and security of the program itself, so that learners are at that point, by being in the program, are protected rather than at further risk. And we finally focus on holistic learning opportunities, and that includes connecting with other types of programming options, and in this case would largely be around child protection programming. So thank you very much for the question, very important. I'd also be interested in hearing if there are any thoughts from Abba or Ruth on how their programs are also addressing that issue.
Yeah, Abba and Ruth, please jump in if you have any examples about how your programs address any kind of support to sexual exploitation and abuse, that would be great to hear.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, one of the major components of our program, which we take very seriously, is a child protection policy, which ensure that all actors in our program are trained and sign up to, and it includes a lot of stands against any type of abuse, including sexual abuse against any of our children. So this is very major in our program, and we have like a no tolerance policy towards our child protection policy. Yeah.
Thanks, Abba. And then an interesting question, I think this will be answered by Kayla again. Do you think that catch-up programs are better than accelerated education programs in countries where there is poor infrastructure? Kayla.
Great. Yeah, that's great. And there was also another question, whether in IDP contexts that would be more appropriate for catch-up programs or accelerated education. And really the difference is about who the learners are and what the learners need. So it's not that one program type is better in a specific context than another, but rather we need to look at how much time learners have been out of school, whether they're over age, whether they're able to return back to the education program they were in. So some of these considerations are really important for distinguishing between whether a catch-up program or an accelerated education program is truly the best response. Both programs accelerate the acquisition of skills, but catch-up is for those learners who have been out for shorter periods of time, and it doesn't lead them to certification, whereas an accelerated education program is for those that have been out for 2 or more years and are therefore 2 or more years over age. And we want to help them get through the whole primary curriculum and get certified and then get into secondary school. So we have seen extensive numbers of both catch-up programs and accelerated education programs in low-income, conflict-affected contexts, IDP contexts, which have been effective as long as they're designed to meet the needs of the learners and as long as they're the right type of program for the learners' needs. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. And another question for you, Abba. Did you adapt the catch-up program curriculum to take into consideration diversity, equity, and inclusion? I think it's, did you adapt the accelerated education curriculum to take into consideration diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, the catch-up curriculum is a condensed version of our initial curriculum for the Second Chance program. And at the Second Chance program, we're dealing with the most marginalized kids in Liberia. So of course, we have taken into account a lot of things that have to do with diversity and equity. And it's a highly inclusive curriculum. Yeah.
Thank you. And another question that I think is relevant to you, Ruth, around working with communities. Did you find that parents and communities had a bigger role in supporting accelerated education or catch-up programs during the pandemic? And if so, are there things that you will continue to do as countries phase out of the COVID restrictions?
Absolutely. And like I say in my presentation, we really put an emphasis on working with communities and parents. When we start the program, we had multiple sessions, because the first thing is to make sure that they understand the process, they understand the program, and they engage, because this is really important, and they take responsibility to make sure that the kids will attend the school. And the community also play a big role to supporting those parents in terms of making sure also that the kids feel free in school, feel safe in the school environment. So this is really important. And right now, even that the COVID-19 is, especially we continue with a small group of parents, and we continue to put the awareness to make sure. And then I have to say that that we don't stop. It has to be a continued process. It's not about just doing one session or two. It's really to keep the relationship moving up. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. And I think there's lots of good lessons that have resulted from the COVID pandemic, and lots of things that will hopefully continue. I have one kind of, I guess, sort of bigger question. I think we're at time. I think this is for everyone to answer. Maybe Kayla, you can begin. Formal education is facing an unprecedented situation. Is non-formal education, especially accelerated education, more affected by this pandemic?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great question. I would say non-formal education and AEP in particular are very much at least as affected as formal education. I don't know that I have any specific evidence, but just some musings myself is, non-formal education learners are already those who are extremely, extremely marginalized, have really had difficulty being in the formal education system, and COVID-19 is only going to make their ability to be in school even more difficult. So I would imagine that in that sense, learners in non-formal education are facing huge, huge challenges. I also worry that, because the world is having to put such a huge focus on entire education systems, I worry, and again, I don't have evidence of this, but I do worry that non-formal education systems might suffer from, detracting attention from that just to get the whole education system up and running. Of course, there also is a lot more attention now on non-formal and especially flexible education options. So it's possible that the other is, that the other side of the coin is true, that we're having more and more attention on non-formal education. Certainly can't be sure, but I'd be really interested to hear how non-formal education is faring in Cameroon and Liberia.
Yeah, Ruth and Abba, if you have anything to add on briefly, I think, because we're just around at time, but if you have anything to add on around how non-formal education specifically has been affected by the pandemic in Liberia or Cameroon, very happy to hear. Thanks, Abba.
Yeah, thank you. I really think non-formal education, especially accelerated educational programs, were really affected even more than formal education, because like Kayla said, we're already working with marginalized students, and like in our case, we're already working with students who are behind and over age already. And if we are accelerating like 3 years into 10 months, every single day is very important. So if for every day they miss, it's way more, it affects them way more than kids from formal school who still have time in their favor. So I think really like accelerated educational programs were really hard hit by COVID, and in the case of Liberia, by Ebola and the war and other crises. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Abba. I think that I would agree with both of you. And any last reflections, Ruth, before we wrap up?
Yes, I totally agree with my previous colleague. And here we have children who face really multiple challenges. We have poverty, we have cultural barriers, and all those plus the COVID-19, I think, is just making the program very challenges also. The last reflection, maybe we are trying to put the families to really get some nutrition helps. And this is also a really big challenge, because kids tend to drop off of the program because sometimes of the hungry and parents who cannot afford simple basic social needs every day. So I believe this is also because of the COVID-19 situation. Thank you.
Great. Well, just a really big thank you to all our panelists, Kayla, Abba, and Ruth. Thank you so much. And thank you to INEE for hosting the webinar. And then thank you, everybody who's listening. And just a reminder that the recording of this webinar and all the presentations and all of our tools and guidance will be shared by email and all of the AEWG resources, especially the catch-up principles and the resources that Kayla presented, are all available on the INEE website. So once again, thank you very much. And I wish you all, I don't know, a nice evening or morning or wherever you are in the world. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you once again to all the panelists. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.